Hi, everyone. Welcome to Crime in Court. This is the 1996 Menendez brothers retrial. We are reading through the transcript because that is all we have. No cameras were allowed in the courtroom. This is obviously the state of California versus Erik and Lyle Menendez. We are reviewing their case in the lens of today's you know, acknowledgement of what the horrific maltreatment did to the brothers and how it affected the outcome of their situation. Including not just what they did to stop this situation, but also the court proceedings and everything that came along. Back in the 90s, we didn't talk about male on male maltreatment. We didn't talk about those things. And it wasn't as known, the effects of abuse and how that might psychologically affect someone later on in life. So that's kind of the lens that we are taking to look through this trial. We already streamed through the first trial, which took place in 1993, ended in a mistrial. We are on trial number 2, which, as we know, ended in a conviction. As you are watching this, or as this premieres, it is going to be the day of the brothers' resentencing. So, finally, maybe it'll finally take place, and they'll have their resentencing hearing. It's been delayed and delayed and delayed, but after last week, there was a motion to recuse. May 9th, there was a motion to recuse Nathan Hochman. The team pulled it. They no longer want to recuse him. They're going to move forward. Recusing him would have meant more and more delays, longer time for the resentencing and all that. So they're moving forward as is, but Mark Garagos kind of hinted that there may be something coming in the works because they found out some information that might be something that would be beneficial for them later on. So I don't know, kind of alluding to something, not really sure what it is, but we shall wait and see. So without further ado, let us please get started. Everyone, hit that like button. And all right, let's get going here. Making sure it all fits in the screen. Okay. So, Mr. Andersen, today we are on part 22, and today is Brian Andersen, who is the uncle of the brothers. As you may or may not know, Brian Andersen is on the side of the brothers should stay in prison for life or should have gotten the death penalty because they did actually, him and another brother of Kitty's. So Mr. Brian Andersen and Milton Andersen, they are the brothers of Kitty Andersen, and they were not supportive of the brothers after this all happened. They sued the brothers, all sorts of things. So this is his voir dire. This is new stuff that just we had the argument at the end of the last episode, which was Jamie Pisarcik part D. So we are on now. So they argued about what should come in and what shouldn't come in with Brian Andersen. There were new things that the prosecution wants to bring in because they keep doing that to the defense, and the judge keeps letting them. But because of the late discovery and all that, they're letting them do this voir dire. So up first, it's going to be without the jury, and then in the next episode it's going to be what he actually testifies to. So just preparing you for that, and let's get started. All right, so Brian Andersen is called to the stand. He's sworn in and all that good stuff. He spells his name, which is Andersen with an E, and direct examination begins. Mr. Khan says, so on the screen, obviously you can see who Mr. Khan is below me. Him and Carol Nahara are for the state. You can see Charles Gessler, Terry Towery for Lyle. Barry Levin, Leslie Abramson for Erik, and Judge Stanley Weisberg also on the screen, as well as me. All right, so um, Mr. Anderson, after the deaths of Jose and Kitty Menendez, did you come to California? Yes, sir. Do you recall how long after the deaths you came to California? The next day after I learned of the deaths. And Miss Amerson says, I'm going to object and move to strike as non responsive, overruled. Do you recall what date that would be? It would have been, I learned of the deaths on the Monday after, and I came on the following day, Tuesday, which would have been the 22nd, I believe. And after your arrival in California, did you have cause to go to the house of an attorney by the name of Randy Wright? Yes, sir. And do you recall what it was that caused you to go to this home? The Kitty and Jose's safe, thank you, had been removed from the house and taken to the Randy Wright's garage. Can you tell us who you learned that information from? I learned that information from Lyle. And do you recall if that was pursuant to a telephone call or was that something that he told you in person? It was something that he told me and I believe Carlos Peralt at the same time when we were at their home, I believe in Beverly Hills. Okay, and sometime after you received that information from Lyle Menendez, did you in fact go to the home of Randy Wright? I did. Do you recall how you got to his home? I believe that Carlos Peralt drove. If I remember correctly, Carlos Peralt drove he and I there. Do you know where Erik and Lyle Menendez were at the time that you and Carlos Peralt went to the home of Randy Wright? We were following them, as I remember. Can you tell us what happened after you arrived at the home of Randy Wright? A discussion ensued about having the safe drilled to be opened and getting a safe company that would come out or a lock company to come out and drill the safe to open it. And was that action in fact taken? Yes, the lock company, safe company, whatever they were, arrived and they ultimately opened the safe. Where was the safe at the time that it was being opened by someone from the safe company? Inside the jury of Randy Wright. And where were you at the time that the safe was being opened? Behind the home. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I can't hear the witness. The court says, if you can move a little closer to the mic and speak right into it. The witness says, my leg is the problem. I apologize. As I recall, I was either in the house or behind the home outside the garage. Now, what happened after the safe was opened? The Miss Amerson says, I'm going to object as beyond his personal knowledge as to the safe being opened, given what he just described. The court says, why don't you lay a foundation? Mr. Khan says, yes. Were you present at the home when a locksmith arrived? Yes. Do you recall where you were at the moment of the arrival? We were in the home. Okay, and what happened after the locksmith or someone from the safe company arrived? Before they would open the safe, they wanted to be paid, and they wanted, as I remember, I think it was $300, as I best recall, to open the safe, and there was a discussion about the fee, and no one had any money on them, apparently, to pay it other than me, so I paid the fee to open the safe. Where did that discussion take place? Either immediately behind the home, which is where I think it took place, outside the garage doors, or in the garage itself. Let me clarify what you mean. When you say immediately behind the home, are you referring to outside of the premises itself, somewhere on the property? Outside the garage door, right behind the garage. And in fact, and at some point at some point in time, were you in fact at this location that is outside the garage door? Yes. And at another point of time, were you in fact inside the home? Yes. Now, once the payment had been made, do you recall if you remained at that location or if you changed locations? I Don't recall whether I stayed in the house or I moved behind the house, but I stayed there. At some point, did you receive any information that the safe had been opened? The After the people that were paid to open the safe, they went into the garage with the doors closed, and after a short time they came back out and said the safe had now been opened and available. Okay, and what happened after you heard that the safe was now open and available? I wanted to go in and see what was in the safe. Then what happened? Lyle did not want me to go into the garage. He said that it was what was in the safe was only to be seen by him and Erik, and Carlos Berwalt and I felt we should be in. And after a discussion, Lyle said that some things that might be in the safe could prove to be embarrassing to my parents, and that out of respect for my parents, I wish you would respect my wishes and not join with us to open the safe. I felt it didn't make any difference. I wanted to go in and see what was in the safe along with everyone else. Carlos insisted that I respect the wishes of the boys, which ultimately I did. I want to point out the brothers had always been trying to protect the parents about the abuse and not wanting that to come out. And there's testimony that friends and relatives and people would come over to the home and there'd be like hardcore corn playing for everybody to watch, including the brothers and their friends and people. So, yeah, this there might have been things in that safe that Lyle was trying to protect Jose's reputation, Jose's image, because Jose and Kitty were so very protective of their image. I guarantee that's what they were doing here, was trying to protect anything that might have come out that might make Kitty and Jose look like the bad people that they were. And did the defendants go into the garage alone? Yes. And sometime after they went into the garage, did you go inside the garage? Yes. When you went in, had the defendants already come out or were they still in there? They were there next to the safe where they had just come out. I don't remember which the garage door, or I don't remember which. Okay. The garage door, I think, was then opened, if I remember right. Did you ultimately look inside the safe? Yes. The safe was drilled, and I looked inside the safe. There were some papers there, I guess. Ms. Abramson says, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I couldn't hear the last few words. The court says, I'll have the reporter read it back. The answer was read back. Mr. Khan says, now, you said that you arrived in California on Tuesday following the homicides. Do you recall what day that this trip to the home of Randy Wright took place? It would have been the following day, Wednesday, or the following day, Thursday, one of the two. So nobody knows what day it took place. Everybody's like it was either that day or that day, but nobody can pinpoint it. And by that time, had the will been found yet? No. Was a will found after that trip to the home of Randy Wright? As I recall, it was. And do you recall when the will was found in relationship to this time of the trip? Shortly after that. Would that mean the same day or a different day? Do you recall? It was around the same time. It could have been the next day. Okay. Now, sometime after the will was found, did you go to a bank? Yes. And what was the purpose for you going to a bank here in California? There was a safety deposit box in that bank that was being rented by Jose and Kitty. And what was your interest in looking in the safety deposit box? To see if there was another will. When you went to the bank, did you go alone or with someone? We went to the bank. Carlos Beralt was there, Lyle and Erik were there, and I was there. And there may have been others, but definitely those four. And was there any discussion concerning who would be present at the time that the safety deposit box was open? As best I recall, the bank people felt that the propriety of the safety deposit box, that it was acceptable for Lyle and Erik and for Carlos Berwalt, the named executor of the existing will, to be present at the opening of the safety deposit box. And was and did you have any further conversations with either of the defendants concerning who would be present at the time that the safety deposit box was opened? Again, they wanted to be the only two that were there when they opened it. Ms. Abrahamson says, I want to object, Your Honor. It's not responsive and not identified who's talking. The court has sustained. The answer stricken. Some people have an agenda and they really have like talking points that they want to say. Mr. Khan says, can you identify which of the defendants you had a conversation with concerning whether or not you and Carlos Barral would be present at the time that the safety deposit box was opened? With Lyle. And do you recall where Erik Menendez was at the time that you had that conversation with Lyle Menendez? In the same area. Okay, and what did Lyle Menendez say to you at that point in time? Again, he stated that there may be some personal things in the safety deposit box that would be embarrassing to his parents, and that he felt that it was important to protect his parents, that just he and Erik would be the ones that would go to the safety deposit box. And did you honor that request and not go into the area of the safety deposit box at the time it was opened? I wanted Carlos Beralt, the then named executor on the existing will that was found, to go with the boys, and he said that he was going to respect the wishes of the boys and not go, even with my insistence that he go with them. Did both you and Carlos Beralt stay away from the area at the time that the safety deposit box was opened? As I recall. Now, at some point in the time following these incidents, did you have a conversation with Erik Menendez in regards to the mafia? Yes. Just prior to coming out to California on one trip, I had called to apprise the boys of my flight schedule flying in, and that time they were living in Marina del Rey, as I recall, in one of the apartments they were in. Can you tell us approximately when this trip was to California? It would have been towards the end of, and they didn't put a date. It's just what's that? Uh, hyphen? It's not a hyphen. I can't think of the word. They didn't put the date. The reporter. All right. So are you referring to a telephone call that you had with one of the defendants? Yes. And who did you speak to in that telephone call? I spoke with Erik. And what was said in that telephone call? I had asked Erik what was happening, and Erik had said that they had been contacted by the mafia and that they were told to be very careful and that they were going to hire bodyguards to protect them, and that was about the extent of what he said at that time. Okay. And do you recall, as best you can recall, the exact words of Erik Menendez when he related to you what he had allegedly been told by someone from the mafia? That he and his brother Lyle had better be careful what they say and what they do, and that they were, at that point, they were going to hire bodyguards to protect them. Erik Menendez told you that at that point he was going to hire bodyguards, or he and his brother were going to hire bodyguards. That's correct. Now, when you received this message from Erik Menendez indicating to you that he had received an admonishment from the mafia, how did you respond to Erik Menendez at that time? I was stunned. I pressed for what they were doing to protect themselves if they communicated this to the local authorities, what they were doing, and that this was very serious. And I just pressed for what was being done about it. And the more I pressed, the more Erik wanted to stop the discussion. And then he stated, I was not supposed to tell you about this anyway. We have to stop talking about it. And then he asked me not to tell anyone of the conversation. Okay. Now let's go back in time now, once again, to the time that you first arrived in California following the deaths of Kitty and Jose Menendez. Did you have a conversation with the defendants, Erik and Lyle Menendez, concerning the will prior to the time that the will was found? Stevenson says, I'm going to object. That's leading and suggestive, Your Honor. Court says, overruled. The witness says, yes, either the next day, or the following day after I arrived, Lyle, Erik, and I were looking through various drawers in the Beverly Hills home to see if we could find a will or other information that could be helpful with respect to the homicides. And at that time, I remember we were in the master bedroom, Jose and Kitty's bedroom, and I had mentioned that they were now the heirs to everything that Kitty and Jose had. And Lyle acknowledged that was the case, that everything would fall on his shoulders. And I told him that he would need a lot of guidance and help, and he agreed that was true and asked if they could lean on me for business guidance and help in conducting affairs from that point forward, and I pledged that I would. And where was Erik at the time of this conversation? The three of us were in the bedroom. And as you were having this conversation with Lyle Menendez, was he a party to that conversation? Erik? Yes. I remember Erik saying that he had not thought much about business, but he was going to have to. Thank you. I have nothing further. And now we are on cross-examination. So, just as a reminder, we are not in front of the jury. And this is basically everything that he just testified to, that's what the prosecution wants to bring in front of the jury. And they're doing it like as a test run without the jury, just to say, like, hey, judge, is this okay? Can we bring this in? And now the defense gets a chance to ask questions to follow up on everything that he just testified to. So, Ms. Abramson for Erik, for the defense, says, how did you hear about the deaths of your sister and brother-in-law? I was in my office on Monday, the 21st, and I received a call from Marcy Eisenberg. And what time of day was it, if you remember? It was around the middle of the day. Your office is in the Chicago area? Yes, ma'am. And who did you talk to after you received that call from Marcy Eisenberg? My son Tim was in my office, sorry. And did you telephone anyone to discuss this? I telephoned my family to let them know what had happened. And who in your family did you call? My brother. And is that Milton Andersen? Milton Andersen. My son Tim was working with me and was in the office at the time of the call came in. I called my son Alan. And did you call your estranged wife Pat? I might have, I don't remember. Did you call your sister Joan? Joan Vandermolen. We've seen her testify, and we've heard from her on many press conferences, although we have not seen her in a while. And her health is not in the greatest condition right now. So prayers for Joan and prayers for Aunt Terry, who the DA sent to the hospital. So hopefully they are in recovery mode and doing better. So he asks, did you talk to Joan? And did you call your sister Joan? Either I did, or perhaps Milton said that he would do that. And did you make plans to come to California? Yes, ma'am. And who did you make those plans with? Did you make those plans with your brother and sister? I made plans with the travel agency. And do you have any documentation now showing when it was that you came to California? Yes, ma'am. And do you have it with you? I believe I have it at the hotel. Did you show it to prosecutors? I don't remember if I did. I may have. Did you show it to Detective Zoller? Again, I may have. And that's your hotel here in California that you have these documents at? Yes, ma'am. Trying to prove what day he came in because she thinks that this is BS. This whole line of questioning, all that story of uh being there when the safe was opened and all that. Like he's making some stuff up. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I'm not going to pursue that. The documents, I guess. Your Honor, I'm not going to pursue that, but I am going to ask that someone from the prosecution, I know the witness is disabled today, but someone from the prosecution retrieve those documents and any other documents that the witness may have shown them over the course of his interviews and bring them to court this afternoon so we may see them. The court says, yes, let's proceed, and we'll arrange to do that during the lunch hour. Ms. Abramson says, thank you very much, Your Honor. In February of 1994, Mr. Anderson, did you have a two-day interview with Detective Zoller, Mr. Khan, and Ms. Nahara? So the prosecution and the lead detective. What was the date again? November to February. February, sorry, 22nd and 23rd, 1994. I think that's about the time. And you did have an interview that lasted the course of 2 days? I think that's true, yes. Have you had any other 2-day interviews with them besides that one time? I may have, but I don't recall. Did you tell them at the time that you came to Los Angeles following the homicides on the Wednesday? I arrived on the Wednesday. I left on Tuesday from Chicago. My flight landed around 12 or 1 a.m. California time, so I departed Chicago on Tuesday and I arrived in California on Wednesday. I don't buy that, but whatever. Okay. And the documentation you have at your hotel would show that you arrived like in the middle of the night, but technically on Wednesday. Is that correct? I believe so. So Wednesday is the first day during daylight hours that you were here in California following the deaths. That would be correct. I can't wait to see if he actually does have the papers and they bring them in. And do you have any independent recollection now, Mr. Anderson, as to what day it was that the will was found? Only that it was a few days after I arrived. If I were to tell you that it was found on Wednesday, would that surprise you? I don't know that it would surprise me. Okay. There was a service here in California for your sister and brother-in-law that week, that very week, right? Correct? Yes, ma'am. And that service was on Friday. I believe that's right. And after that service, people left, the family left, went back east, correct? I don't remember exactly what people did after that. What did you do after that? Certainly, I went back to Chicago. Well, doesn't it make sense that all the people that traveled out to California would have to travel back to their homes? And did you go to Princeton for the funeral? Yes. Did you go to Los Angeles to Chicago to Princeton, or did you go Los Angeles to Princeton? I went from Los Angeles to Chicago and then from Chicago to Princeton. And do you recall what day the funeral was in New Jersey? Sorry. I believe he lives in Chicago. The Milton or the Andersons are in the Chicago area or were. I don't know about the children of Milton and Joan and Brian, but I do know that Milton and Brian lived in the Chicagoland area. And Joan, I thought Joan did too. Or what? No, Terry was the one that they went to their home. Um, so Terry, I think, lived in Chicago for a while, but no longer. Anyways, because they lived in Chicago for a while. So do you recall what day the funeral was in New Jersey? Not exactly what day, no. And you don't have, if I'm hearing you properly, you don't have really an independent recollection as to whether the memorial service in California was on that Friday or not. I think you're correct. Did you tell the prosecutors and Detective Zoller by the way, did they give you the 8-page statement that the police report, the police report typed up for that 2-day interview? Have you had that? No, ma'am. So you haven't had a chance to review those notes or that report. No, ma'am. Did they give you the testimony from the previous trial? Yes, ma'am. Well, let's see if you can remember independently. If not, I'll be happy to show this to you. Did you tell Mr. Khan and Ms. Nahara and Detective Zoller back in February of 94 that the following, quote, the day he arrived, meaning yourself, or the day after they responded to the Wright house to open the safe, they were looking for a second will? Do you remember telling them that? It's possible. And does that sound like the first will had already been found by the time that you went over to the Wright's house, to Mr. Wright's house? Again, that's possible. So you're not certain that you went to the Wright house before the second will was found, before the first will was found. I couldn't be accurately sure. And this was a very emotional and traumatic time for you, was it not? To say the least. And other members of the family were here and they were emotional as well. Yes, ma'am, very. And you were spending some energy comforting and consoling each other, were you not? I'm sure that was true. So, with that, would it make sense to you that then, in that emotional milieu, you wouldn't have a perfect memory of the sequence of events? So, during that emotional time, you wouldn't have this perfect memory? It was a very emotional time. And you don't claim to have a perfect memory of the sequence of events, do you? I do not. Now, is it your recollection that you had to call the locksmith for the first time after you got, excuse me, to the Wright residence that they didn't already have a locksmith en route? I'm not sure I understand the question. I didn't either. Okay, if I understand the testimony this morning, you're indicating that you and Mr. Baralt went in a car following Erik and Lyle Menendez over to Attorney Wright's house, correct? That's what I remember. Okay. And he lived very close by the Menendez home. It wasn't very far. And is it your recollection that after he got there, there was first a discussion about needing someone to drill the safe, and then a locksmith was located, and a locksmith was called, and that all of that happened after you got there? All of that happened. It may not have happened in that sequence. Well, how long do you have to wait, if you can recall, before a locksmith came to drill the safe? I don't remember the time. Do you recall it being a long time, or did it seem to happen relatively quickly after you got there? I can't recall exactly how much time. Mr. Anderson, do you remember calling Randy Wright, talking to him, telling him you were coming over, making arrangements over the phone for there to be a locksmith there before you actually went over? I think that could have happened, yes. So now you're saying you were part of the locksmith coming there. You went from kind of just an observer to now you're also wanting to see what's in that safe. This garage that belonged to the Wrights, was it attached to the home? As I remember, it was. And could one get into the garage directly from the inside of the house through a door? As I remember, they could. And do you remember before the safe was drilled, looking at it? Yes. And do you remember trying to open it before it was drilled? I don't remember that. I may have. And didn't one person or more than one person come from the lock or safe or whatever company was going to drill? It seems there were more than one person. Do you recall how many? I don't recall. Could have been two, maybe three. And did those people go into the garage and close the door to do whatever they were doing? Yes. And was that for safety reasons, or did they tell you we got to close the door just in case something goes wrong? There was a discussion of who would be there when the safe was opened, and the safe people just wanted to do their job. They didn't want to be involved in the discussion, and they went in to open the safe. So they were in there all by themselves, opening the safe, as I recall. In fact, nobody was in the garage when the safe was being drilled, except the drillers. I was not in the garage. So no one else was, to your knowledge, either. I don't recall whether Randy Wright was in there or not. Okay, but apart from him, Lyle and Erik Menendez were not in there. I you and Carlos Baralt were not in there, correct? That's correct. And only after they had opened the safe did these men come out. I assume they were, however many they were male. There were no women safecrackers these days. As I remember, they were men, yes. And they came out and said, okay, it's open, correct? That's correct. And then Lyle made a statement that he wanted to look first so that there wouldn't be any embarrassing papers. He and Erik would look, yes. Okay, but it wasn't true. The garage door was open at that time that they went in. I don't remember that. If it was open, I think it was closed again. Well, it's your testimony that neither you nor Carlos Barral were inside the garage when Lyle and Erik walked in to look at in the house. That's correct. So if Mr. Baralt testified that he was inside the garage, was he lying? I remember him not being in there. And you said when you walked in and looked in the safe, there were papers there in the safe. I remember there were a few things in there. What were they? I don't know. Didn't you previously say like yesterday, weren't you told by, I assume it's either Lyle or Erik, that's what's inside the safe is the keys to the safety deposit box and instructions on where to find the box. Objection, compound, overruled. Isn't that what you were told? I may have been, I don't recall. Do you recall in February of 1994 telling Detective Zoller and the prosecutors the following? Once the safe was opened, he, meaning yourself, and Carlos were told by Lyle and Erik that there was nothing of any importance in the safe except for the keys to the bank safety deposit box plus instructions on the location of the box. I may have, Miss Abramson, but I don't remember at this time. And you don't remember at this time if that's what was inside the safe? I don't recall. Really? But you can recall everything that your nephew said to you that was somewhat incriminating, but you can't recall what was inside the safe. Okay. Do you recall that you had no idea that there was a safety deposit box or where it might have been until the safe was open and Lyle and Erik told you about it? Again, I don't remember the sequence of events upon which I learned about the safety deposit box. Do you know how you learned about the safety deposit box? I don't recall at this time. Do you recall who had the key to the safety deposit box? No, ma'am. Excuse me? No, ma'am. Well, do you recall that when you went to the bank, the safety deposit box didn't have to be drilled? There was a key for it. Remember that? That could be true. I don't remember that specifically. And do you remember that Carlos Peralt took possession of the key at the Wright's house because he was the executor? He could have. At this time, I don't recall. And when the safety deposit box was opened, the bank officer was there with Lyle and Erik, wasn't he? I think he was the only one that was there. He had eyes. He could see, right? As far as you could tell? He had eyes. Yes. He didn't come out and say, hey, they took a document out of the box, they destroyed it, they ate it, they swallowed it. Nothing like that. I wasn't with him all the time. Well, how long did it take? 15 minutes, I think. In any event, he didn't come out and say, they took something. He didn't go to the executor, Mr. Baralt, and say, they took something out of the box. They're concealing something from the box. You never heard anything like that. No, ma'am. And you didn't have any standing to go into the safety deposit box room or the safety deposit room because you were not the executor of the will, correct? That's correct. And in fact, Lyle and Erik didn't even have to invite you to go to the bank, did they? That's correct. They didn't have to invite you or tell you about the safe being at Mr. Wright's house either. I assume that's correct. You had never been named as an executor on the will by Mr. and Mrs. Menendez, had you? Not that I'm aware of. And you're not aware, since these days in August of 1989, of any lawyer coming forward and saying, I wrote a second will for Jose Menendez, are you? No, ma'am. Now, when did Erik move to the Marina City Club? I can't recall specifically what time. And how many trips did you make to California between the death of your sister and brother-in-law and January 1st, 1990? I don't recall. More than two? Could have been. More than four? Could have been. And did you keep records of all those trips? I have the airline tickets, I think some of them. And do you have them here with you in California now? No, ma'am. Excuse me? No, ma'am. And did you look over those airline tickets before coming here? Yes, ma'am. And do you recall now the dates of those airline tickets? Not all of them. Do you recall any of them, the dates on any of them in 1989? I seem to remember one about November of, I'm assuming that's 89. Okay, there were many in 1990, especially after Lyle and Erik were arrested, before and after. Okay, and before Erik was arrested, immediately before he was arrested, it's your understanding he was living in the Marina City Club, correct? Immediately before he was arrested? I mean, that's where he lived at the time that he was arrested, except that he was in Israel on a trip. I think that's true. So, how do you date this phone call when he was living in the Marina City Club to 1989 versus 1990? I remember coming out in 1980, in 1989, could have been closer to the holidays, could have been after the first of the year. So it could have been either one. Yes, it was prior to January of 1990. Prior to January? I thought you said it could have been after the first of the year. Could have been, but it could have been prior to, say, the middle of January. It was before we went to the trip on to Aspen, Colorado. And you took that trip in mid-January. I believe so. Excuse me? I believe so. There's some hearing issues going on here. Did you bring records of that trip with you? No, ma'am. And what was the next conversation you've told us about this conversation? What was the next conversation with Erik Menendez about the mafia call? When did that happen, if ever? As I recall, he picked me up from the airport in a 4x4, and I had a brief conversation with him, and he asked me not to discuss it with anyone, that he should not have that he should not have talked to me about it. You say he picked you up in a 4x4? That's a car? I believe, as I remember, it was a four-wheel drive vehicle with a battery of headlights on the roof. Was it his car? I believe that it was. I don't know. And you said something to him at that time about this mafia phone call? I was still concerned, and he asked me not to discuss it with anyone. Were you aware of a Los Angeles Times Magazine story that came out November of 1989 talking about the death of your sister and brother-in-law and possible mafia links? Not specifically. So it's in the media. It's not necessarily that it came straight from Lyle's mouth, or either of their mouths about the mafia story. So it, the LA Times Magazine is doing stories on possible links to the mafia. So we know that it didn't necessarily originate from Erik and Lyle, and they're not actually the ones that were spreading it. Did you ever see that big story on the homicides that was in the LA Times magazine? I may have, I don't remember. When was the first time, Mr. Anderson, you ever mentioned the statement by Erik about receiving a threatening phone call to anyone? I don't recall. Let me read you something. This is the handwritten notes that Detective Zoller prepared based on your conversation last night. Have you seen them? No, ma'am. Where were you interviewed? This is dated last night and the time is 6. Where were you at 6 last night with Detective Zoller? At the hotel, at the, blah, blah, sorry, my tongue is tired. At the hotel where I'm staying. Were you having a meal when you were being interviewed, or were you just being interviewed? We were sitting at a table in preparation for a meal. So you were having a meal. Why can't you just say that? And were the prosecutors there as well? Yes, ma'am. And were you answering questions or were you just chatting? Chatting, answering questions. So both. And how did the following statement come out? Here's how it begins. Quote, Erik told him he had been contacted by the mafia. Marta knew about it. Quote, be careful or they would be talking to one of their boys. Close quote. Brian, did you go to the police? They can trace the line, etc. Erik, well, never mind, I shouldn't have told you. Now, how'd that little thing come out of last night? Well, they asked me if I remembered any conversations with either of the defendants, and that occurred to me. I just happened to remember this years and years later. Any conversations ever? I mean, they're your nephews. You talk about them a lot. Or was it focused? Any conversations about the mafia? No, just any conversations at all. They just asked me if I could remember anything, and that occurred to me. And had it never occurred to you before since August 20th, 1989? It may have. Did you ever tell anybody about it before? I may have. Who may you have told? I can't remember. What does Marta knew about it? That's that. Who's talking? You? Who's talking to you? Erik? Erik said that to me. Erik said Marta knew about the phone call? Yes. Did Erik say when the phone call had occurred? He did not. Although the impression I got was shortly before the conversation I had with him. Okay, so he wasn't claiming that this was something that happened shortly after the homicides, but something that happened shortly before you called him at the Marina City Club. That was my impression of the conversation. And to this day, Mr. Anderson, you don't know if it's true whether or not he did get a call from someone threatening him or whatever reason, do you? I do not know. And the case had received a fair amount of publicity by then, had it not? I don't understand that. The homicides of your sister and brother in law had been publicized all over the country. Oh, yes. And you recall, do you not, seeing at least newspaper articles looking for mafia links? I have, yes. You were aware that that was something the police were investigating? I believe so, yes. In fact, Mr. Anderson, after I was became Erik's lawyer, you and I had a number of conversations where you asked what we were going to do to pursue the mafia link. Remember? Could have been, yes. We had one of those over dinner, in fact, in Beverly Hills, you remember, with my husband there. I remember having dinner with you and your husband. That could have been. Now, you heard the words I read to you from Detective Zoller's notes that are supposed to reflect this conversation with Erik. You told it somewhat differently today. Do you have a clear recollection of the words, or do you just have a recollection of the gist of the conversation? I remember Erik telling me of the incident and that he indicated that Marta had knowledge of it and they were going to hire bodyguards to protect themselves. Okay, I don't see that in here, the going to hire bodyguards. Did you tell that to the prosecutors and the detective last night that that was part of what Erik had said? I may have, I don't know. You don't recall? You don't recall you what you told them last night. Is that right? Everything that I told them last night. That's not an answer. Well, you don't recall this, do you? You don't recall if you told them about the bodyguards last night or not. It seems to me that I did, but I may not have. You thought you did? I think so. He didn't hire any bodyguards, did he? I don't know. Well, you went to Aspen with him in mid-January, and you think this might have occurred shortly before, and he didn't have any bodyguards in Aspen in mid-January, did he? No. Do you recall the trip to the safety deposit box being the day after the trip to Mr. Wright's, or are you not clear on when that happened? Very close to the same time as I remember. Do you recall whether or not it was, well, I don't want to confuse you. To the best of your recollection, was it before the day of the memorial service? It may have been. I'm not sure. It may have been the day after. The day after was Saturday. Do you think you went to the bank on Saturday? Possibly. Lyle flew out Friday night. You think you went without Lyle? No. Now, for this conversation you say you had at the house in the master bedroom, do you have any idea now what day that was? It would have been either Wednesday, the day that I arrived, or the following day, Thursday. Who else was in the house at the time? I don't recall. Well, you weren't alone with them. The rest of the family was there, weren't they? I don't recall. How long had you been in the house before you had this conversation? I don't recall. Where were you staying when you came out that Wednesday? Where did you go from the airport? To a hotel. What was the hotel? I believe the Bellage or something like that, if I recall right. Something like that. When you got to the hotel, I take it you got there in the early morning hours between 1 and 2 in the morning, something like that? I would assume so. Did you see any other members of the family at that time? I don't recall whether I did or not. And do you have a recollection of when you first saw anyone you knew at the Bellage Hotel? In the morning? For breakfast? I believe it was at breakfast. And do you recall having breakfast with other family members? I remember having, yes, I do. And with whom? What other members of the family can you remember having breakfast with? I believe the Peralts were there, and maybe Maria? I don't remember exactly. Maria being Mrs. Menendez? Yes, ma'am. What about Marta Cano? Was she there? She may have been. What about your brother Milton or your sister Joan? My brother Milton was not there. Was Joan there, your sister? Well, at some point she may have been, not the first time. And I take it Erik and Lyle Menendez were not there? Not as I recall. In fact, did you know where they were? I believe I was told they were staying at Mark Heffernan's house. And who told you that? I don't remember that. So what did you do after breakfast? As I recall, I went to Beverly Hills home. To the Beverly Hills home, sorry. And you were allowed to go in. Yes. Were there people from Kroll Investigations there? There were other people there. There was activity around the house. Were they cleaning the house? Yes. Was furniture being moved? There was activity around the house. But you don't know what it was. It could be relating to the security for the house. And you saw security people there? Yes. And who else went to the Beverly Hills house from the Bellage Hotel with you? Everyone else? I don't recall. And what did you do when you got to the house? I looked through the home. What were you looking for? It was the first time I had been to the house. I just looked to the house. So you had never been to that house before? No. Did you see Carlos Menendez there? At the house I saw that particular time? That day. I think during the course of the day, yes. So at some point you remember Carlos Menendez being there? Yes, ma'am. Do you remember when Carlos Menendez found the will? I didn't hear the question, ma'am. Do you remember when Carlos Menendez found the will? Oh, I'm sorry. You said Carlos Menendez. I was thinking of Carlos Baralt. I want to focus your attention, if I can. You know who Carlos Menendez is? Yes, I do. But I did not. When you switched from Carlos Baralt to Carlos Menendez, I didn't switch with you. Okay. So you remember Carlos Baralt being there. Do you remember Carlos Menendez being there? I believe Carlos Menendez was there at some point in time, yes. Well, some point in the day, or some point in the time that day. I believe so. Were you there when he found the will? No, ma'am. Do you know where the will was found? Only hearsay. Okay, so you weren't in the house when that happened? No. And did you know on that Wednesday when you were at the house that Lyle and Erik were, well, strike that Lyle was at the Bel Air Hotel? Yes. And do you remember a point in time that Wednesday when when Lyle came to Beverly Hills house with with Carlos Baralt? I don't specifically remember that. You weren't there when that happened? I may have been. Well, do you remember any occasion when Carlos Baralt came with Lyle to the Beverly Hills house from the Bel Air Hotel? It may have happened, I don't recall. Do you remember where you were when you first learned a will had been found? I was at the Bel Air. You were at the Bel Air? Yes. And was Carlos Baralt at the Bel Air also? He was there with me at some point. I don't know if he was there at the time, but he may have been. And what did you do after you heard a will had been found? I wanted to get back to the Beverly Hills home and see what the will said. So did you do that? I don't remember if that happened that day or if it happened the next day. I mean, on whatever day it was that you went there or that you were at the Bel Air and heard that a will was found, what did you do after you heard that? What did I do? Yeah, did you go? You said you wanted to go to the house to see the will. Did you do that? Did you go to the house to see the will once you learned it was found? Why are these questions? It's so difficult for these lying witnesses to give a straightforward answer. He says either that day or the next day. So you might not have gone there that day. I might not have. And what were you doing at the Bel Air? I was there with Carlos originally talking to Lyle, and Lyle left, and I wound up sitting in the room waiting for phone calls from people basically to coordinate dinner, whether we were going to have dinner at the Bel Air or whether we were going to have dinner, or where we were going to have dinner, sorry. So you were there talking to Lyle when you found out a will had been found, and then Lyle left. Is that right? I don't know that that's the sequence. Do you remember Lyle and Carlos leaving, in fact, and coming back to the house? And leaving me there alone? Yes. Is that what you're asking? Yeah. I think that happened. I don't know if Lyle was with Carlos or not. So let's talk about this conversation that you told the prosecutors about yesterday. Had you not remembered this conversation before yesterday? Yeah, yikes. What conversation are you speaking of? The one that you told us about here that you had with Erik and Lyle in the master bedroom while looking for a will. And what was the question? Do you remember that conversation before last night? I may have. Did you ever tell anyone about it before last night? I may have. You don't know? I don't remember. Wow. Did you tell anybody affiliated with the prosecution of this case about it before last night? I don't think that I did. And why not? Didn't seem important to me and it was never asked. Does it seem important now? I think so. Why? Why does it seem important to you now when it didn't before? I think anyone relative to the case that I can remember is important. Okay, always been true, hasn't it? Objection, argumentative, sustained. Tell me how it came about last night that you related this conversation to the prosecution. What did they ask you? It was part of the same conversation, if I could remember any conversations I had with the defendants. So it was just that, as I recall. Did you tell them about that before the mafia conversation or after? I don't remember. Did you tell them about this before the discussion about the safe and the safety deposit box or after? I had that discussion with the safe and the safety deposit box quite some time ago. You didn't talk about it last night? I guess I'm getting confused, Mrs. Abramson. Okay, last night you had this interview with the prosecution, correct? Yes, ma'am. And you said last night they asked you, tell me any conversation you remember with the defendant. Is that right? They asked if I could recall any, and they weren't specific about what subjects. Is that right? I tried to think of things that took place. I tried to think of things that took place, events that took place over their whole lives. No, they wanted me to focus on the area after the homicides had been committed. Okay, that was the time focus. They also had a topic focus, didn't they? Various topics, I suppose. Well, what do you remember that one of the topics being any discussion about a will and if they thought that they were in the will? Yes. Now you're aware, are you not, Mr. Anderson, of Carlos Peralt's statements both on the stand and off the stand that Jose Menendez told him that Jose Menendez had told his sons that they had been disinherited. You're aware of that, aren't you? Objection misstates the evidence. Overruled. I'm aware of. Miss Abramson, for some reason, cuts off the witness she's asking questions of, and she asks the question and she cuts him off. She says, you're aware that that's what Carlos Peralt has testified to, and that's a statement he made. I'm not aware of Carlos Peralt's testimony. Are you aware that Martha Cano has testified in this trial that she had a discussion with Erik and Lyle where they told her unequivocally that they did not believe they were in a will, sorry. I'm getting tired. That they did not believe that they were in a will. I'm not aware of that. And you're not aware of any of that. Is that what you're saying? Yes, ma'am. And no one from the prosecution has ever suggested to you and Erik and Lyle in their defense or saying that they were told that they were disinherited and they did not believe they were in a will. You've never heard that story, or you've never heard that. Yes. So you do know that. You know that it's an issue? Yes. And how long have you known that's an issue? I don't know when I became aware of that. Years? Hasn't it been years? I don't know when I became aware of that. You knew it was an issue in the last trial, didn't you? I may have, but I don't recall. And that was the first interview you gave to the prosecution after the last trial was over, correct? I had interviews before the last trial. Excuse me? I had interviews with the prosecutors. Yes, but the last one before last night was after the last trial. Yes. That's the one in February of 94? Could have been. The first interview with these prosecutors? Yes. I don't remember when the first interview was with these prosecutors. Court says, all right, we'll take our recess and resume at 1:30. And we continue on. Again, no jury. The court says, all right, we're ready to resume. And the witness is still on the stand. You may continue your examination. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, I understand this morning that when I had asked the witness about having these travel records and he indicated they were back at the hotel, I was convinced that the court had agreed with my request that they should be brought to court this afternoon, but that has not been done. The court says, yeah, I said that we would see if that can be done, but I don't think Detective Zoller was here at the time. So I don't know where his hotel is. Miss Amerson says, I do. It's here in the valley. The court says, it's in the valley? Yes, I assumed it was going to be done as well. Miss Amerson says, it wasn't. Mr. Khan says, we would get Detective Zoller to go. The court says, well, where is he going to go? What is he going to get? Ms. Andersen says, I think he should talk to the witness and see where the things are. The court says, I assume it's in his room. The witness says, I can bring it later, tomorrow morning. Ms. Andersen says, I don't think we will be here tomorrow morning. The court says, we will see about that, but first things first. Mr. Khan says, yes, could we perhaps, if we could just get the keys, we could take care of that. The court says, well, it's between you and the witness if you want to talk to him. There's a brief pause. Mr. Khan says, I advised counsel of the, Ms. Abramson says, after I asked. Mr. Khan says that the exhibits that are here in court are additional exhibits we are going to be presenting to Dr. Lawrence on Monday, and we are not going to be using the diagrams, the illustrations we had spoken about. We will, however, be using the computer. The court says you will. Excuse me. You will or you will not. We will. Ms. Aronson says, for what? For the same purpose we stated we were going to use it. Part of the reason, excuse me, I need a sip of water. Hold on one sec. Okay, sorry. Part of the reason we didn't want to use it was because of the difficulty of providing a computer to counsel to follow up with, because this is Dr. McCarthy's personal computer. Counsel has indicated she was not concerned about the computer, so we will be using a computer presentation. We will introduce into evidence hard copies of the photographs for the jury to take as exhibits into the jury room with them. Ms. Abramson says, Your Honor, we have been litigating this, 3 months? We were given what we were told was the program, the presentation that was going to be used, and we were given another CD with the new presentation with additional photographs and new diagrams, and now I am being told for the first time that we really don't have the faintest idea what Dr. McCarthy is going to use because he is not using the diagrams, but he is using something on his computer. So we are back at square one, and I am not happy at being at square one the week before the witness is called. The court says we will get more details later on. Let's first finish with this examination. She says, okay, you may continue, or he says, okay, you may continue. Ms. Abramson says, thank you, Your Honor. Cross-examination continued. Now, Mr. Andersen, I was asking you this morning concerning this conversation you had in the bedroom with Lyle Menendez concerning his and Erik's becoming their parents' heirs. You know what we're talking about, correct? Yes, ma'am. And is it your testimony that the three of you were the only people in the bedroom at that time, in the master bedroom? Yes, ma'am. And is it your testimony that the three of you were the only people in the house at that time? I don't remember that. Excuse me? I don't remember that. Well, where was everyone else? I don't know that. Were you familiar with the fact that Carlos Menendez at some point was looking at the family computer? He may have been. Well, I'm not asking if he may have. I am asking, do you remember that happened? He may have been. I don't recall at this time. Do you remember at this time that the family computer was in the master bedroom? At the time I was talking to the boys? Yes. If the computer was in there? Yeah, that the computer was there. It may have been. Well, do you know if it was or not? It may have been. I don't recall. He doesn't recall anything, apparently. May have been is a guess. Is that a guess? I don't recall. Objection, argumentative. All right, he said he doesn't remember. Miss Abramson says, do you remember a period of time 3 to 4 hours when Carlos Menendez, your sister Joan, Terry Baralt were working on that computer in that bedroom? No, I don't remember that. You weren't there when that happened? Is that what you're saying? I don't believe I was. Okay, and if I were to tell you that that happened on Wednesday, does that help refresh your recollection about when this conversation with Erik and Lyle took place? I don't know what time of day you're talking about. I can't. Well, what time of day, sir, are you talking about? Objection vague as to time. Overruled. What time of day was it when you had this conversation with the two defendants? The witness says, early in the day, as I recall. Miss Abramson says, early in the day, Wednesday, as I recall. Early in the day that you had breakfast with all the other members of the family and you all went over to the house together? I am not certain that all the other members of the family were at breakfast. I don't know that I ever said that. But you said the other members of the family went to the house with you, didn't you? I believe so. Excuse me? It was a very emotional time. I cannot remember specifically who traveled with me and who didn't, or if I was taken over there by Lyle or Erik, or what may have taken place. Now, are you saying that Lyle and Erik were at the Bellage? Again, I don't remember. Okay, that what you do remember is that when the will was found, you were at the Bel Air with Lyle, correct? When I was apprised of that, it was found, yes. And you were apprised, were you not, that Carlos Menendez found it? I don't remember who found it. Oh my God, we're asking the same things. And he is just a difficult witness. The court says, why do you believe the conversation that you had with the defendants occurred before the will was found instead of after the will was found? The witness says, it was a time that we were together right after I came out to California. Miss Andersen says, but the will was found right after you came out to California too, wasn't it? The will was found after I came out. Yes. So, how do you know this conversation was before the will was found rather than the day after? I think it was right after. The will was not found the moment that I got to California, the will was not found. Well, the moment you got to California was in the middle of the night, and you went to the Bellage Hotel, and you woke up, and the next morning you had breakfast with members of the family, correct? Well, as best I can recall, I had. I had breakfast. It was either that morning or the following morning. Anyway, I know that the morning I got up, there was no will found. But later that day, there was a will found. I don't remember whether it was later that day or the next day. So, how do you remember, though, that you were with Erik and Lyle all alone in his bedroom before the, in their bedroom, the master bedroom, before the will was found? He says, it was my first contact with the two boys after I arrived in California. And how do you know that the first time you were with the boys together wasn't until after the will was found? He says, it was that very morning after I woke up. Now that you're certain of that very morning, what? That's terrible grammar. Or we're missing some words. Now that you're certain of it, that very morning, that very day. So you're certain of, correct? Very sure. And where was Erik when you first saw him that day? I don't understand the question. Where did you first see Erik that day? Either at the Bellage or the hotel, or at the Beverly Hills house. Either at the Bellage or the house. You don't remember. I'm not sure. And how did he get to wherever you first saw him? He had a car, I'm sure. In whose car? I don't recall. And how is it that you and he and Lyle were all alone in that house? What was everybody else doing? I think you asked that question. I don't know what everybody else was doing. Fair enough. If I were to tell you that the first two people at the house were Mrs. Menendez, sorry, and Carlos Menendez, and they looked through the house together and they found the will, that's not your recollection, is it? Vegas to time, objection, Vegas to time, first two people, when, what day? The court says, well, it assumes all sorts of things that are not in evidence here. Ms. Aronson says, all right. And she's her next question is, but it's absolutely clear in your mind that it was the first day that you were here that you had this conversation with them. Is that right? Yes, ma'am. A conversation you never told anybody about until last night. Is that right? It occurred to me to talk about it last night. Oh, brother. All right. You never told anybody about it until last night. I don't recall whether I had or not. And how did you get in the house to have this meeting with them? I walked in. Yeah. How did you get in? Did you have a key? The house was open, or the security guard let us in. Okay. I'm just reading what's on the page. So there was a security guard there. Yes. And you don't remember if Erik or Lyle were there when you got there, or whether they came with you. Is that what you're saying? I don't remember that event. Well, how long were you in the house with them before the conversation occurred? We walked through the house and looked at various things inside and outside the house, and then went upstairs to the bedroom. It was whatever the tour time would take, I guess. Not very long. Well, I don't know. I wasn't there. Mr. Anderson, how long is that? How long was that? I don't recall exactly. And who was there? Just you and the boys? And the security guards? Is that what you're saying? Not in the bedroom. The security guard was not in the bedroom. But at the house, all you saw was yourself, Erik and Lyle, and yourself. Is that what you're saying? I saw a security guard outside the house. And it was just you and Erik and Lyle alone in the house? I don't know that. Don't remember that? I don't know if we were alone in the house. Period. I don't know if we were alone in the house. Well, where were you, uh, where were you just before you went to the house? Other than outside the house, is that what you mean? Yeah, what was your previous location? I think, as I remember, we were coming from the Bellage Hotel. And where was the rest of the members of your family when you were leaving the Bellage Hotel? They were, I don't remember, they were either at the hotel or someplace else. And how did you make contact with Erik and Lyle Menendez in order to go to the house and have this tour? I don't remember if they came by the hotel or they called or what. Don't remember? Not clearly. What about Mrs. Menendez? Did you see her at any time before you wound up at the house with Erik and Lyle Menendez? You're speaking of Maria Menendez? Yes. I believe she was at the hotel, but I can't remember that morning who exactly was there. How many nights did you spend at that hotel? The Bellage? Yes. Like how many other hotels did you stay at? I stayed there until I left to go back to Chicago. Yes. And how many nights did you stay there? It would have been Tuesday night, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I would assume Friday night as well. So that would be 3 or 4 nights. All right. Well, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is 4 nights? Yeah, I'm not sure. You're not sure. You don't even know when you went back to Chicago, did you? After the memorial service? Memorial service. And how soon? That day? The next day? I don't know if it was that day or the next day. And you don't even really remember what day the memorial service was on, do you? I don't believe it was on Friday. Where was it? The Theaters Guild Directors Club. What time was it at? What time was it? Midday, as I recall. And what were you said that you met Erik and Lyle somehow, somewhere, and were at the house together, correct? We were at the house together. Is that right? That's correct. And it was early in the morning. Is that what you're saying? It was in the morning. And you don't know how arrangements were made for them to be there that day. Is that right? I don't know how the arrangements were made, no. And it was just the three of you alone in the house. Objection asked and answered. Overruled. I have answered that question. I don't know who else was in the house. I don't believe any, or I don't remember if anyone else was in the house. Miss Andersen says, do you remember anyone else being in the house? Objection asked and answered. Overruled. Again, I have answered that and I don't recall. Miss Andersen says, so you don't recall whether or not anyone else was in the house? Objection asked and answered. Court says, you just said that. Ms. Amerson says, okay, and you don't, in your memory of this tour of the house, what rooms did you go into? All of the rooms. All of the rooms? And you don't remember, do you remember seeing any other people in any of these rooms? Objection asked and answered. Overruled. I may have, the witness says, I may have. Ms. Abramson says, you just don't know. I may have. You just don't remember. I may have. I don't recall. Objection asked and answered. The court says, all right, he answered it. Ms. Amerson says, and did you look for anything when you were in the house? Anything specific? We were looking for anything that could indicate what happened. What caused what happened. We were looking for anything. Who is we? Lyle and Erik and myself. You were looking for evidence of the crime? Anything that could happen, anything that would help. Well, what were you? What kind of things were you looking at? We did not know what we were looking for. We just were looking. Looking where? In the closets, in the drawers? Yes. And what were you hoping to find in the closets and drawers? We didn't know. What closets and drawers did you look at? The bedroom? Which bedroom? There's 5. We may have looked in all of the rooms. We looked in the master bedroom. We looked in the closet, one side, which was apparently for Kitty, and another side which was apparently for Jose. So you were looking through Mr. and Mrs. Menendez's closets. Yes. And what did you see in the closet? Other than clothes? Yeah. Did you see anything else besides clothes? I don't recall. And what were you looking through? The clothes? There were drawers in there, as I remember. So you were looking in the drawers and whatever was in the drawers? I don't recall. Okay. So you just said that you were looking at what was ever in the drawers, and now you're saying I don't recall. This guy is infuriating. Um, and what else did you look through? I think I answered that. The drawers, the dressers and the drawers in the house, in the various rooms in the house. And you didn't know what you were looking for. Objection asked and answered. Sustained. Did you look through the den where they had been, where their lives had been taken? I looked. We looked in all the rooms. So you looked through the den. Objection asked and answered. Overruled. Yes, I wanted to see the den where the homicides had been occurred or been committed, sorry. And were the sofas there? I don't recall that they were. I don't remember. Was the carpet there? I don't recall. I don't think so. What else did you see? Did you see any evidence in the den that the homicides had occurred? Not really. It had been pretty well cleaned up. So you didn't see anything that indicated that a shooting occurred in there. Is that right? Nothing. Nothing that was obvious. So in the middle of looking for evidence, well, what else did you look at besides the clothes in their closet and drawers? What else did you look through? The court says, do you mean in the master bedroom? Ms. Andersen says, yes. Other than the dressers and the drawers or closets. Yes. I think that's all that there was. I think that's all that was there. I'm struggling to read through this. I'm tired. It's been already an hour and a half of reading, so we got a little ways to go yet. That's all that was there was dressers and the hanging parts of the closet. Apparently, I am not understanding your question. Let me ask you this. You said at some point that Lyle told you there was a safe there, right? Yes. Did you see a safe in the house? I did not. Did you ask about a safe or did he volunteer that there was a safe? The conversation came up about a safe, and I don't remember the exact time. So you don't remember the time. Well, was it that day when you were looking for things? I don't recall. So you don't know if the conversation where Lyle Menendez told you that the safe was at a lawyer's house happened that day. You can't remember that. That's correct. So how long did you stay at the house with Lyle and Erik that day? I don't recall. And how did this conversation, what did you do after this conversation? Talked some more, continued to look through things, and eventually went downstairs. Uh-huh. Looking for what? Looking for a will, looking for any notes, any indication of anything, just looking for things. Now you're looking for a will. Is that what you're doing there? Looking for whatever. I did not know what we were looking for. We were looking for whatever we could find. Did you think finding a will was going to solve the crime? I don't think so. Well, did you have any conversations with Lyle and Erik while you're rummaging through their parents' personal effects as to why you're doing it? We were all doing it. The other members of the family were doing it too, weren't they? I think everyone was looking for whatever they could find. And they were all there looking at the same time, weren't they? So they were all there just looking through their stuff, trying to claim what they could for themselves, I bet. I don't recall that. So you told Detective Zoller last night that this conversation occurred when you were looking for a will, didn't you? I may have done that, yes. And in fact, what you were looking for was a second will, wasn't it? I don't think so at the time. I don't know. You're not sure, though, are you? I don't think so. Excuse me? I don't think that was the sequence. Well, Mr. Anderson, if other members of the family were to say that they were at the house before you even got there from Chicago, and there was no time that you were alone in the house with Erik and Lyle in the master bedroom, what does that tell you that you have a problem with your memory? Does that tell you that you have a problem with your memory? Oh, don't know why my phone's ringing, sorry. Um, Mr. Khan says objection, assumes facts, not in evidence. The court says it's argumentative. Ms. Abramson says, you made this story up recently to get them, didn't you, Mr. Anderson? No, ma'am. Hold on. Sorry. All right, let's get back to it. Court says it's argumentative. Ms. Abramson says, you made this story up recently to get them, didn't you, Mr. Anderson? No, ma'am. And you're still suing Carlos Baralt and the probate court, aren't you? I don't think I'm suing Carlos Baralt. You don't? The court says, okay, we're getting beyond the scope of this hearing. Miss Abramson says, this morning when you testified, you said that you were in the master bedroom. You mentioned the following words. Now it looks like you're going to be their heirs to everything. Do you remember saying that this morning? Yes, ma'am. And Lyle said if that was the case, then everything would fall on his shoulders. Is that correct? I don't know that the negative pronoun preceded what he said, but he said something like that. We can check the reporter's notes. I just want to know if you testified, Lyle said if that was the case, everything would fall on his shoulders. Is that what you testified to this morning? Lyle said that everything was going to fall on his shoulders. No, that's not what I asked you. I asked you what you testified to this morning. Do you remember what you said this morning? He said that he knew that they would be the heirs and that everything would fall on his shoulders and he would look for my help. Mr. Anderson, you understand I'm asking you if you have a memory good enough to remember what you said today. Objection, argumentative, rephrase the question. Do you remember testifying this morning? Lyle said if that was the case, everything would fall on his shoulders. Do you remember saying that? Lyle said that. No, that's not what I'm asking you. I am asking you what Lyle said. I am asking you if you remember what you said. Yes. This morning? Yes. Do you remember saying Lyle said if that was the case, everything would fall on his shoulders? Yeah, and I don't remember the negative pronoun preceding it, but I said that. Now you want to change that? Anything else? You want to tell us that Lyle said that's different than what you said this morning because now is the chance? No. I want you to tell me again what this conversation was. First of all, you had been looking through the closets and the drawers. Is that right? That's correct. And then you stopped looking through the closets and the drawers for a moment in order for you to bring up the will. Is that correct? We were having conversations and revelations, and that's when the conversation came up. And these conversations and reflections, were you all standing up? Were you all sitting down, half and half? What? We were in the bedroom. Yeah, in the room. Sitting in the bedroom and standing in the bedroom. Well, you were sitting or standing? I don't recall. And who started this conversation? I did. And tell me again what you said. With your mother and father gone, you would be their heirs to their estate. And at that time, Lyle said, yes, and everything is going to fall on my shoulders. Let me see if I've got this now. With your mother and father gone, you would be the heirs to their estate. And Lyle says, yes, everything is going to fall on my shoulders. Yes. And then who said what next? Erik said that he had not thought much about business, but he was going to have to start thinking about business. Well, who injected this into this discussion? Didn't you have a little talk about they should lean on you and you would help them out before Erik said that? Conversations were exchanged. I don't remember exactly the sequence. Am I correct, Mr. Anderson, in characterizing this conversation as one in which you were offering to involve them in business dealings with you? No, ma'am. You were offering the benefit of your business and financial experience to them? They asked me if I would help them. I pledged my help. I'm sorry? They asked me if I would help them, and I pledged my help. When you said they didn't speak like stereo at the same time, did they? It's not like they opened their mouths and the same words came out. That's true. Lyle said that. So Lyle said that, and Lyle said what exactly? Lyle said that he would be looking for my help. If you can, pretend you're Lyle and say what he said. Uncle Brian, I'll be needing your help. I'll be looking for your help in keeping things together, and I pledged my help. So I'll need your help. I'll be looking for your help to keep things together. Is that what you said? Words to that effect. This morning you testified Lyle asked if he could lean on you for business. They could lean on you for business guidance and help. Did he use the word business guidance? Yes. So did he say, Uncle Brian, can we lean on you? Can we look to you for business guidance and help? Or did he say, I'll need your help. I'll be looking for your help to keep things together? I believe he said both things. Mm-hmm. Seemed a little lost, didn't he? Objection, argumentative, sustained. I don't know how that's argumentative, but okay. He indicated he didn't know what to do, couldn't possibly handle this by himself. Objection calls for speculation, sustained. Did he say that I could handle things myself, Uncle Brian? Or I could never handle this myself, Uncle Brian. I need you. I don't remember those words. Words to that effect? He asked for my help, and I pledged it. And Erik said he hadn't even thought much about business. Isn't that what you testified to this morning? Yes. And when this little private chat was over, what did you do? As I recall, we continued looking for things. Which things? Any things? Whatever we could find that would help with what took place. Did you find Jose's, uh, what? His valet? Is that what you call it? Jose's valet? His little wooden organizer? I may have. I don't recall. Did you find the guns in the closet? I don't recall. You don't recall even seeing guns in the closet, do you? I don't recall. You don't recall seeing a box of 22 caliber bullets in Jose's valet either, do you? I don't recall. Do you remember seeing about 24 cardboard boxes packed up in their closets? I may have. I don't recall. No recollection of that? You don't recall looking through any cardboard boxes, do you? I looked through a lot of things. I don't recall. You don't recall the fact that you had been looking through through any family papers, do you? We were looking through drawers, and there may have been some boxes there in the closets. But no recollection of that? What were you doing at the Bel Air the day that you were there when you learned that the will had been found? I don't understand the question. Why were you at the Bel Air Hotel? You weren't staying there. Why were you there? I don't recall. What airline did you fly in on? I don't recall. Did your children come out here during that period of time during the memorial service? No. Did your former wife come? Yes. When did she get here? I don't recall. Did your sister and brother-in-law come? I don't recall my brother-in-law. My sister came. When did she get here? I believe she came with my former wife. And you don't remember when that was? No, ma'am. Did your brother come? No. Do you remember Marta Cano coming? Yes. When did you first see her? I don't recall. Did you attend any meetings at Live? Yes. When was that meeting? I don't recall. Did you go to the funeral home? I don't remember that I did. So you may have, but you don't remember. That's correct. Was there a piano in the house? Yes. Was it yours? My mother's. Did you take anything from the house on this occasion when you were having this private meeting with Lyle and Erik Menendez? No. And I don't think you've told me yet. How long total were you in the house with them on this occasion? I don't recall. And what did you do after the meeting? I don't recall. I think you asked that question and I answered it. And if I asked you what you did that night, do you not recall that also? Had dinner. And you don't recall what you did the next day. I can't recall the exact sequence of events. Who did you have dinner with? The Menendez family. All of them? I don't know if they were all there. Where? At dinner. Where did you have dinner with them? I don't recall, but I think it may have been the Bel Air. And do you remember seeing any of them at the house at any time between your meeting with Lyle and Erik that you've told us about, and dinner. I may have, but I don't recall. Well, do you remember seeing Carlos Menendez at any time that week? Yes. Where? At the Bellage. You don't remember ever seeing him at the house? Just the Bellage? Is that what you're saying? No. The court says Detective Zoller has returned here. Did you bring back what it was? Ms. Abramson says, Mr. Anderson, you bought a one-way ticket to come here after you learned of the deaths of your sister and brother-in-law. It may have been an open return. I am not sure. And you told Detective Zoller to bring just this one. Looks like an itinerary and copy of the ticket? That's what you asked for. Well, you indicated you had a number of tickets. I told you those are back in Chicago. Is this the only document you brought here that you showed the prosecution since you've been here this trip, other than photographs and postcards? The court says, what does it say as far as his arrival in Los Angeles? Ms. Abramson says, it indicates, Your Honor, that his arrival date was August 23rd, which is the Wednesday that his arrival. One never knows when it actually hits, but he was supposed to get in at 12:13 a.m. It shows a return booking, well, a return ticket to Chicago O'Hare, but it does not have a date. It's an open return. Well, never mind. Okay, what I'd like to do is make a copy of this, have a copy of this to use when the witness testifies. The court says, all right. How much more do you have? How much do you have? Abramson says, this is it. This is L final question. Court says, okay. Ms. Anderson says, is there anything else, Mr. Anderson, that you remember being said to you by Lyle or Erik Menendez during this private meeting you had with them at the Elm Drive house? Speak now. I don't recall. The conversation went on. I don't recall other things. Well, is there anything else you can remember having to do with wills or inheritance? Hold on one second. Sorry, I've been expecting a call and then I missed it and the last time and now, okay, I had to take it. All right, I am back. He says, I don't recall. The conversation went on. I don't recall other did I finish this line? Hold on. Ms. Abramson said, it says, is there anything else, Mr. Anderson, that you remember being said to you by Lyle or Erik Menendez during this private meeting that you had with them at the Elm Drive house? Speak now. He says, I don't recall. The conversation went on. I don't recall other things. Okay. Well, is there anything else you can remember having to do with wills or inheritance or needing you or leaning on you or anything like that? Not at this time. So you indicated in some of the interviews you gave with the prosecution that you've kept notes of conversations you've had with various people. Is that right? I've had some of those. And did you show any of those notes to the prosecutors? No. Do you have any notes that reflect this conversation that you claim occurred at the house? No. Do you have any notes concerning this conversation you say you had with Erik Menendez over the telephone sometime at the end of 89 or the beginning of 1990, concerning a phone call he received? I don't remember if I do. Were you met at the airport when you came in, Mr. Anderson, or did you have to get yourself to the Bellage? If I remember, I was met by a limo. So you were met by a limo? Yes, ma'am. So you didn't have a rental car at your disposal while you were here, is that right? Not that I recall. So how did you get to the house from the Bellage? I was driven in by a limo. I don't recall. You just said that a limo pulled up and now you don't recall. What is this guy's problem? He does not seem trustworthy to me with all these I don't recall. I mean, I get that people's memory fades over time, but to be this evasive and to say in 1 second, yeah, a limo pulled up, and then in the next second, so you were driven in by a limo. I don't recall. What? I don't believe you. Anyways, so you were driven there, but you don't remember if it was a private car or a limo? I don't recall. The court says the notes that you said you have of conversations, where are those notes? In Chicago, the witness says. The court says, and you don't remember if there's any notes regarding your conversation with Erik Menendez about the mafia? The witness says, I do not. Court says, when is the last time that you looked at the notes? It's been a long time. Well, how long is that? A year, perhaps? And the notes that you have, are they a lot of notes or just one page or a couple things? A couple pages? Just scratches on pieces of paper. And you don't recall what they are or what they represent as to which conversations they reflect? No. Okay. All right. Anything else? Miss Abramson says, not at this time, Your Honor. The court says, any examination by Lyle Menendez. Mr. Gessler says, no, Your Honor. Court says, any redirect? No, Your Honor. Says Mr. Khan. The court says, okay, thank you, sir. You may step down. And we're going to have some argument about what just unfolded there for a minute here. The court says, all right, now the defense has been given a chance to question Mr. Andersen since he was not cooperative in permitting you to interview him on these subjects, and the purpose of this was to get more information as to why you feel you need time. Ms. Abramson says, yes. The court says, to prepare before he takes the stand. Ms. Abramson says, yes, I think it's pretty obvious why, Your Honor, but if the court wants to know, we spent the noon hour searching through all the notebooks, not all of them, but the ones that have previous interviews, and some of them multiple interviews, both by the police and by ourselves with various family members. And we made a list of 5 people minimum that we need to talk to about this chronology, which never had the significance before we can adequately cross-examine Mr. Andersen. Court says, I thought you did a pretty good job, actually. Ms. Abramson says, huh? Court says, I thought you did a pretty good job. Abramson says, thank you, Judge. A compliment from you is cherished. The court says, are you sure that you don't want to preserve this in some fashion for future use? Ms. Andersen says, it's not going anywhere. We have these reporters. They take it down and cast it in bronze, and I guarantee you when he comes back it will sound different. There are 5 family members we want to contact before we cross-examine him. These people are all over the country. One is his sister, Joan. One is his ex-wife, Pat. One is Carlos Menendez. We would like to interview Mrs. Menendez about this. We need an interpreter to do that, Terry and Carlos Baralt, and we have to go back and look at the records of the company that removed the furniture and cleaned the house. It's a lot, and he isn't going to. The court says that's one facet of his testimony. Ms. Abramson says that's the crucial facet as far as I'm concerned. The court says, why do you need additional time to prepare on these other things? Ms. Abramson says, well, I think the mafia remark is ridiculous, Your Honor, with all due respect. I don't think it's sufficiently probative to allow it to come in. It's months and months after the offense, my client. The court cuts him off and says, well, your client moved in October, November? Ms. Abramson says, October, November. The court says, so it's not that long. Ms. Abramson says he doesn't know if it's November, December, or early January. He doesn't know when it is. And the fact of the matter is, my client is not saying the mafia took his parents' lives. My client is only saying he got a threatening phone call, and this is not his blaming the mafia for taking his parents' lives. He had numerous opportunities to do that when talking to the police where it would matter when you're shifting blame. And he never did that with the police. So Erik never said at any point that the mafia did this, is what she's trying to say. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I don't think that I don't think there has been any proof that either Erik or Lyle said it. And the witnesses that have said that they said the mafia did it aren't that reliable. The court says, well, that goes to the weight of it, not its admissibility. I just want to focus on the preparation aspect of it more than anything at this point. Miss Abrahamson says, I have to talk to Marta Cano since he's dragged her in. But it's not just preparation. I just don't think that comment discovered as it is now, this late in the game, should be something I have to deal with. It doesn't have much probative value. In fact, I don't think it has anything. It's not the same kind of comment as asking who is responsible for your parents' death, and you start talking about the mob and the rhymes with corn business. It's nothing like that. For all we know, we do know, if you recall the testimony of Detective Zoller, that remember he testified at the 402 hearing on the admissibility of the statements. I know this is mean to do this to you. Before the first trial, we were talking about the suppressibility of the defendant's statements and whether they were or weren't suspect, and you may recall Detective Zoller talked about having a. The court says, you mean the statements to the police? Right. To Sergeant Edmonds? To Sergeant Edmonds. Court says, and a couple of the patrol officers? And the hearing got fairly far afield into also the fact that Detective Zoller went to Erik's apartment at the Marina City Club and told him that the piece was coming out. Court says, yeah. Samuelson says, remember that was in October that he talked, not at the Marina City Club, but he told him in October that a piece was coming out in the LA Times, blah, blah, blah. So we know there was tremendous publicity both at this time and in the context of the publicity, and the court has that magazine article somewhere in the mountain of stuff we lodged with you, talking about organized crime, possible mafia hit. So it's out there in the publicity. It has no value as to consciousness of guilt for my client to say he got a threatening phone call. Moreover, it doesn't matter if he's telling his uncle that he took his parents' lives or not. What matters is if he telling the police various things, and we already have his lies to the police before the jury. I just don't see the things which the witness has come up with at the last minute. The court says, okay, then let's focus, etc., says Miss Amerson. Court says, then let's focus then on the conversation regarding the safety deposit box and the safe. Ms. Aronson says, I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that, Your Honor. I am not asking for extra time so long as it comes out the same way before the jury as it did in the hearing. I don't have a problem with that. The court says, well, nothing is going to be identical. Ms. Aronson says, no, I know. Court says, and also there is a conflict between this testimony and that of Mr. Baralt and Mr. Wright as to. Ms. Amerson says, I know, I do have to do that. I have to prepare with Mr. Baralt and Mr. Wright, but I don't have as big a problem with that. Conversation about the will, this late, last minute. Oh, I don't think it was important. This requires investigation to properly cross-examine him. The court says, okay. Ms. Amerson says, and the Mafia one, I would prefer the court rule that it's simply not admissible, but if it is going to be admissible, I have to do some phone calling. The court says, yeah. Ms. Amerson says, and moreover, I want to see, he says that he has all these plane tickets back in Chicago that we better pinpoint when it was that he came out here on a particular trip that came immediately after that phone call, and I would like to see those because he can't remember, and yet he has the documentary evidence in Chicago. The court says, okay. Mr. Gessler says, or sorry, the court says, Mr. Gessler, do you wish to be heard? Mr. Gessler says, I join in that, Your Honor. So he joins in the objection and not wanting all this to come in. The court says, okay. And the people wish to be heard as to whether or not some of this testimony should be delayed or not permitted at all. Mr. Khan says, well, I think that the testimony should be permitted because the witness provided the information to us last night and we provided it to the defense as soon as we had the information. The court says, let's focus on the request of the defense for further investigation, time to investigate. Mr. Khan says, well, I suppose it's within the discretion of the court to allow us to bifurcate the testimony to allow them some additional time to prepare. So that just means they're going to separate it. So there might be like two portions of his testimony. They might do some testimony now and then do another portion of his testimony later. Um, the court could do that, he says. However, I would like to proceed with as much of that as we can today, if not all of it. The court says, all right, let me say this. Ms. Abramson says, yes. The court continues. As far as the conversation at the house with the defendants as described by the witness, I think from the nature of the witness's answers and how he attempts to place the conversation in a certain time frame, the defense clearly being appraised of this for the first time today should be given an opportunity to investigate it, and because of the numbers of people involved, it certainly would take a substantial amount of time to do that. So I am going to permit the defense to do that before he testifies. It might require that his testimony be delayed even until the phase of the case after the defense has rested, depending on when the people rest in relationship to when realistically the defense can be ready to confront Mr. Andersen about this. As far as the conversation with Erik Menendez on the phone regarding the mafia, it does, from what I have heard, have relevance. I would find that the probative value of it would outweigh any potential for prejudice or undue consumption of time. However, the defense again should be given a chance to investigate it, to try to pin down when it occurred, to interview the other individual mentioned in Mr. Anderson's statement. Also, Mr. Andersen is unsure whether or not he has notes that might reflect this particular conversation, and certainly that should be, if he has any notes regarding any of these conversations, they should be provided so that everyone knows exactly what it is that he has memorialized about that conversation. So, that's also that also the court feels should be delayed until such time as the defense can investigate it and be prepared to confront Mr. Andersen with it. As far as the balance of his testimony, the defense was on notice, I believe, from what transpired during the preceding witness testimony, as well as the opening statement and the hearing involving Mr. Wright, that Mr. Andersen would be called to testify about events relating to the safe and the safety deposit box, or interrelated in the notes of Detective Zoller that related to Mr. Wright, as I recall it when it was presented to me. So the defense was on notice that that was going to occur, and therefore I will permit that examination to proceed. If there is a need for the defense to get some additional material to cross-examine Mr. Andersen on that reference to the safe and the safety deposit box, you can get that material tonight and be ready to do it tomorrow morning if you need additional material if you haven't brought it here. But I think we certainly should start with his testimony and get as much of it as possible before the jury can begin cross-examination on these things that you can. Um, and if there is a need to get more material between now and the completion of his testimony tomorrow morning, you can do that. So that's how we will proceed with Mr. Andersen. Also, there was some discussion about a stipulation or stipulations regarding certain witnesses from New Jersey and an insurance company. I don't know if those have been finalized yet. If they have, perhaps you can state them to the jury as well. Ms. Nahara says, Your Honor, there are 5 drafts that I have given to counsel typed out, and I basically am sure when they have time to look them over, whatever changes they want to make, we can make them very quickly. Mr. Gessler says, There are some changes necessary on Exhibit 100 that I have noticed. I am not sure about the rest. Court says, okay. Ms. Abramson says, the one having. The court says, if you're not ready to do it right now. Ms. Abramson says, no. Court says, I will let you discuss it further. Ms. Abramson says, we are going to ask the court, however, to do something in front of the jury, and that is take judicial notice of the fact that you cannot subpoena somebody to an interview at the district attorney's office. The court says you can subpoena them. It may not be a legal subpoena. Ms. Abramson says, you can do that, Judge. Ms. Towery says, we want to ask the court to take judicial notice that in criminal law, there is no provision in criminal law to subpoena someone to an attorney's office, and that doesn't exist. The court says, do the people wish to be heard on that? Mr. Khan says, yes, the witness testified it occurred, so whether it's proper or not, it is neither here nor there. It apparently occurred, and it's relevant. The witness came for that reason. Ms. Towery says, I think we are entitled to have the court take judicial notice of what the law is. Whether or not the district attorney's office subpoenaed her falsely is another issue, but there is no legal basis for subpoenaing someone in a criminal proceeding to someone's office for a sworn statement. It's not a deposition. The court says, I don't know what the status of the case was at that point, whether it was before the grand jury or how it was structured at the time of the interview. Ms. Andersen says the case was before the grand jury for about a year. Ms. Towery says she didn't say she was subpoenaed before the grand jury. Court says maybe there was a subpoena issued, and instead of calling her to go to the grand jury, they told her to come to their office, or I don't know. Ms. Towery says, I don't know, Your Honor. I asked her specifically. Mr. Gessler says she said Norwalk, and there is no grand jury in Norwalk, Your Honor. The court says, I am not saying that she was subpoenaed to the grand jury, but a subpoena was issued for her to go to grand jury. And someone told her instead of going there to go somewhere else. I don't know. But I agree with the prosecution that you are asking. First of all, you are asking me to take judicial notice of something that is a legal issue, and I certainly can do that. But the question is it relevant? Ms. Nahara says, right. The court says, does it prove anything? Assuming the DA did issue her a subpoena and it was not a valid subpoena, but she thought it was valid, and what does it prove? The DA was being deceptive in getting her into the office, but they got her in and spoke with her. It doesn't prove or disprove anything in the case. Ms. Towery says, well, if the DAs want to, if that's what occurred and they want to reestablish her credibility on the issue, then they can prove that they issued a subpoena. That is, that it was a bogus subpoena to get her to come to the office. But the point is, the court says you can call one of the people who were involved in interviews, whether it's with the prosecutors or Detective Zoller or whoever it was who brought her in, and ask them. I believe the her that they're talking about is Marcy Eisenberg, the assistant of Jose, because I think that's who they were talking about in the last episode where they were arguing over the same issue, the subpoena. Ms. Towery says if they subpoenaed her to a sworn statement, court says yeah. Ms. Towery says you can also call a legal expert to say there is no provision under California law for that to happen. Court says, again, that would be subject to this objection on grounds of relevance. The issue is not whether or not they did it. That's not what you're trying to prove. You are trying to show that she wasn't subpoenaed. That's what you're trying to show. Ms. Towery says, no, I am trying to show in part she changes the truth. Maybe she did receive a subpoena, but it's not for what she said. It couldn't have been. But she's willing to get on the witness stand and say it was. Court says, but that won't prove what you're trying to prove. To prove it happened is by trying to talk to one of the people who did it, whether it was Detective Zoller or a DA, investigator, or someone else. Ms. Towery says, Ms. Bazanich, most likely. I doubt that she'll be willing to come in and testify. The court, yeah, probably not. Court says they're all available. I don't see how my taking judicial notice will affect or have anything to do with what you're trying to prove. Okay, let's get the jury over here and we'll begin the examination of Mr. Andersen then. Ms. Abramson says, okay, we'll take a break. The judge, Ms. Abramson says, Judge, could we request that we do his examination tomorrow so that we have the materials here? The court says, no, because we have this other lady tomorrow as well. I don't want to get backed up to the point where everyone has to catch a flight or something, and we should finish if we can. Ms. Abramson says we can do both tomorrow. Mr. Gessler says, the court says Mr. Gessler was ready to cross-examine him on some matters, and if you need more material, you can do that and get it tomorrow. Mr. Gessler says the only matter we had was the camcorder. The court says, right. Mr. Gessler says, and I would ask, given this witness's lack of recollection and wandering, that he be very carefully tailored by the district attorney to the court's ruling as to what that statement is. The court made a minute order as to the 3 pages. The court says, yeah. Mr. Gessler says, of the camcorder, and the court says, counsel should have those pages available so that you know exactly what it is that that he's going to be questioned about. All right, we will be in recess until the jury comes in, and that is where I leave you guys. That's all I got for you, and we will pick up on Friday, right where we left off, and get to so that was, like I said, that was the testimony for Brian Anderson, uncle of the brothers. That was not in front of the jury. So when we get back, he will testify in front of the jury, and it's going to go on for the end of the day and then into the next day. So we'll read through all of that in the next episode. So thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Please hit the like button on your way out. Bye, guys. Take care.